think we're gonna go ahead and get started. Do I sound okay without a microphone?
You do. You sound great.
I just want to start off and let everyone know this event is being recorded. Yeah, just wanted to give everyone a heads up before we get started. Can you raise your hand if you're a 1L or a 2L? Amazing. Okay. Awesome. I will largely be talking and looking at you all because I know almost everyone else here. My name is Kristen McEnroe. I am a clinical fellow and an attorney at the Food Law and Policy Clinic. I hope if you're here you have some interest in food law and policy. If not, I do think you'll walk away with an interest after hearing from current and past clinical students. I am one of them. I graduated from the law school in May 2024 and I got involved with the clinic as a doula. So I hope to do as little talking as possible because I want to let the law students that are currently working on projects talk as much as they would like. So I'm going to kick us off with Kat. So Kat, if you want to come up here and share a little bit about the projects you work on, and we'll save some time at the end, hopefully around 15-ish minutes for questions and answers, and you can direct that to me, any of the speakers, and we have a lot of our staff here as well. So thanks for coming, and I'll turn it over to Kat.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Kat. I'm a 2L with the clinic. I have 3 to 4 minutes, and I'll go over what I've done with the clinic, what I will be doing with the clinic in the future, and then just high-level takeaways or things to think about. So I got involved in the clinic last year by being involved in a 1L reading group, as well as just like interested in food law generally before even applying to law school. Joined the clinic this fall, and I've been working with our Atlas project as well as with our FPLE project, which has a lot to do with the farm bill, but this semester my team was specifically looking at kind of like, if you're thinking like leg reg admin issues. There was a direct final rule issued by the USDA we were examining, but there's another half of the team, Rachel, who will speak a bit to her work later. And then with that project as well, given everything that's been going on, SNAP shakeups, we've also been doing a lot of research and work on that kind of like emergency response, issuing out like blog posts, in like for the broader community, what you need to know about what's going on with SNAP, keeping people updated. So the very cool thing about being involved with food law and policy right now is that a lot of things are in flux. So, you know, you might be working on one project, but you see something pop up in the news, the clinic staff is great about saying like, okay, you want to research this guidance, especially if it's something that we want to better communicate with the public as a whole. You can definitely sink your teeth into that. And then Atlas is our global, our partnership with the Global Food Banking Network, where we look at food loss and waste laws in countries all around the world. So this semester I was working with Trevor over there on Austria, our report for Austria, which if you're curious about any of this, there's a lovely website where there's like reports on all the countries we have done, and it's very like beautiful and like, fun to play around with. We have like a map where you can like compare countries and all of their laws. So it's been really cool to like take over the clinic's work with Austria. And like, I guess the big selling point is that I got to travel with the clinic, so I did go to Austria this semester, which is a really awesome opportunity, meeting with stakeholders. I think it is one of those pieces with like comparative law where you can only do so much research with like Hollis and like the law school's resources here, actually getting to meet with stakeholders on the ground, so like, how do you feel the impact of these laws? What would make your lives easier, especially as we like are trying to combat the big problem with food loss, both from like a climate change perspective, as well as just, you know, a lot of hungry people in the world and a lot of food being wasted. Those two things just feel very incongruous with each other, and the law can do a lot of things to help mitigate that. So those are the two main projects I've been on. I guess one thing a couple things I've learned. One, with FDLE, it was really cool to kind of like take what I learned during 1L with LegReg and like put that to work. Do like a lot of substantive legal research and ask myself like, is what the administration is doing in this specific instance legal or not legal? So actually, you know, taking from just like, you know, doctrinal like, oh, like it's like actually applying it. It's been really awesome. And then as someone who's like really interested in international comparative issues, same thing, applying those skills. And stepping back, I just love the clinic generally, and it just feels like a second family here on campus, so I always just recommend it for that as well. All of the clinical instructors are great resources, both about whether you're interested in food law or just any of like the legal field generally. Okay, I feel like that was 4 minutes, so I'll put myself up there, but you can ask me like any questions ever.
Thanks, Kat. started with Kat when I was a law student, after she had been accepted to the law school, and I'm so glad to see you here and have you work with the clinic. It's full circle. Great to have you. So we're going to turn over to Sydney to talk about aquaculture.
I'm proud of I'm Sydney. I'm a 2L. I'm on the state aquaculture project. I'm also on the food additives project, which Andrea is going to talk about a little later. So if you don't know what aquaculture is, it's like the farming of aquatic species, so like finfish, shellfish, aquatic vegetation. And something I learned is that large finfish operations can have very severe environmental impacts, not just on water quality, but it can also affect communities, local communities and use of that area. And so what's interesting about aquaculture is it's kind of emerging in a sense of it still feels like you're able to kind of direct the way that the industry is going, just because there's currently no federal control of aquaculture at the moment, because federal courts have said there's no agency that has statutory authority to deal with it. And while there have been attempts in Congress to give that authority to an agency, it hasn't happened yet. So there's just no federal scheme governing it right now. So there is we're at a point where we could kind of influence how it's done to make sure that when it is, if and when it does become federal, we look at the mistakes we made with land-based concentrated animal facilities and don't continue those into these aquatic operations. And so in the state aquaculture project, we're looking at how different states set up the regulatory scheme for their aquaculture industries. And we have found wildly different things in a lot of the states. There are some similarities, but they tend to approach things very differently. And our client really cares about communities-based, values-based seafood production. So we're trying to look at the different state practices to see what kind of looks like the best practices, but also looking at, is it good on paper, but how is that translating into actual enforcement, and how is that getting done? So we kind of look at the regulations for entering the market, as well as once you have an aquaculture operation, kind of the environmental monitoring that the state does or that you are required to do. And it actually is very interesting. I'm a vegetarian, so I don't even eat fish. And I did not care at all about where fish was coming from before this, but now I care a lot, and I feel like it relates a lot, and there's a lot of correlates to the overarching food systems. And there's also a lot of intersection between different kinds of laws. There's property, environmental, there's a little bit of public health, there's some labor law bits, and I do some leg reg too, which I feel like I'm a lot better at reading statutes than I used to be, and understanding what they mean, and fitting together how regulations create a scheme. And I would definitely recommend the clinic and this project to anybody, and you will get to meet so many dogs if you join the clinic, including Trevor's adorable dog, Cliff, as Trevor runs this project. Now I'm going to pass it to Rachel, who will be talking about the farm bill.
I'm also 2L. I am working on the Farm Bill project with Trevor. I'm also on Atlas with Kristen. I'm on the team focusing on youth this semester. But for the Farm Bill, I think one thing that we've done is we're trying to track what's going to happen with the Farm Bill. For those of you who don't know much about the Farm Bill, it's the big omnibus spending bill that funds SNAP usually, and funds a lot of agricultural programs across the U.S. It's really, really big. I mean, it's like the bedrock of American agriculture and basically American, our nutrition social safety net. And typically it's passed on a heavier basis. It's been an unusual couple of years in Congress, and we haven't had a new farm bill, and so it's just been extended and extended. And part of what we've been doing at the clinic is keeping track of marker bills, which are bills that are introduced not only with the intent of having them pass and become independent legislation, but with the intent of kind of, proposing things that could make it into a future farm bill. There's a lot of these, there's hundreds of them. And we have tracked them all. We have been looking at which ones are receiving bipartisan support, which kind of duplicate bills we have in different areas. And then we take that and use that information to both create a spreadsheet for ourselves and then also to create blog posts on the FBLE blog that are public facing. So for this project for me, I ended 1L year kind of sick of law. For anyone else who felt the same way, I was kind of sick of doing
legal work and I wanted more access to policy work. And I feel like at the law school, that can actually be kind of difficult sometimes to get to do any kind of policy work. And so one thing I've really enjoyed about the Food Law Clinic, also about the Atlas project I'm on, is that it's a lot more policy research. It's a lot more public issues focused than sometimes the law can be. And I think for me as a law student that probably wants to spend my working life in litigation, it's been an opportunity to get to experience what policy work is like in a way that's, you know, pretty low stakes, because we have a really great support system here and we're drafting blog posts, and the point is to raise awareness, not necessarily to come away at the end of the semester with a hard deliverable, you know, a memo or something else. So I would really recommend the project. I recommend the clinic, definitely. I think that we've got really great clinical teaching instruction here, and it's been a very interesting supplement to some of, like I said, my more doctrinal legal work in other areas. So thanks for
I'm working with Andrea on additives.
Hi everyone, I'm Andrea, I'm a 3L, and I'm an advanced clinical student, so obviously I really like the clinic. And this semester I'm working on food waste with April and food additives with Emily and Sydney, and so I'm just going to talk about food additives this time. So food additives are really unregulated, or not, I wouldn't say unregulated, but like they're very insufficiently unregulated. And it's actually quite shocking how much goes into our food without us knowing, or without even the FDA knowing. And that's partly, or I don't know how much to attribute, but it's because of the GRAS loop, something we call the GRAS loophole. So GRAS is short for generally recognized as safe, and it basically allows food manufacturers to just put additives in food based on their self-determination that it's safe. And they don't even have to tell the FDA, so they just say, oh, this is great, then they market the food, and then it's in our food, and then it might cause harm. So obviously that's a really big problem that we're trying to solve. And so the main thing that we're doing this semester is working with a client to make policy recommendations for this report that they're releasing on additives. And I really like this project. Like, it involved a lot of brainstorming on what policy recommendations we could come up with. So it's extremely broad. I mentioned the GRAS loophole, but that's not the only thing. We also did like taxes and incentives. We did procurement. So it's very, it was mentioned earlier, but it's very different from the typical kind of writing that you do in law school, which is maybe a brief or a memo or even the analytical paper that you have to write. It's not anything like that. I would say it's it requires you to take like a much broader perspective, and I've just found it extremely interesting. And Emily's been so awesome with guiding us on where to go. It's been a great experience. And so one of the things that we're also trying to focus on is making the language more accessible, just because this can be a very technical space, but then this piece of writing that we're expected to create is supposed to be accessible to laymen and like journalists, so there's also like a difference with respect to that. But yeah, I really enjoyed my time at the clinic. I will be back next semester for the third time, and yeah, so if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. I really recommend the project and the clinic too.
Thank you. Alright, we're gonna transition to Bianca, talk about nutrition programs. Woo! Yeah.
Hello, can you guys hear me? Okay, apologies for my voice. Like I've been saying, my mind is clear, my voice is not. So. But hi everyone, my name is Bianca. I am currently a 3L, and I am involved, my projects this semester have had to do with nutrition, specifically the like SNAP and WIC. And then I've also been working on that with April this semester, and I've also been working on the Atlas like grant project with Lulu and Additives, as well as the waste framework
directive, which has to do with a lot of our, which is in collaboration with a lot of our EU food-based partners. And so my exposure to this clinic actually started around this time last year when I first joined as a research assistant with Heather. I was doing a lot of research on food waste legislation in the US, and I was able to really dive into what the legislative landscape looked like domestically, and I thought this work was really interesting, which led me to formally joining the clinic this semester as a clinical student. And so this semester, working on nutrition projects. For a little bit of context, I know some of my classmates have already mentioned SNAP and these other federal assistance nutrition programs, but SNAP and WIC are now moving into the digital space by with the establishment of programs such as SNAP Online and WIC Online. And so my project this semester has been in collaboration with the National Grocers Association to draft a memo/guidance on what does this program look like, what are the challenges, what are some of the solutions that all of these stakeholders involved with this program is facing. And so I've been analyzing this work primarily from the perspective of participants. And so those are the people who are receiving the benefits as well as grocers. And really doing a really deep dive analysis on the landscape and some of the problems and solutions associated with it. I think this work has been really impactful and kind of like was mentioned before, even though yes, there's a lot of legal research and writing, because this is ultimately in collaboration with the National Grocers Association, the audience is not as legal focused as other classes in law school may traditionally be. And so I feel like this semester I've developed a lot of very practical skills and have really shaped my writing to be a lot more action oriented. And as someone who worked for law school and I actually worked in a grocery store on their strategy team, I know that there is a space where lawyers and business people want to work together and trying to figure out how do you take what is happening on a legal level and translating it into insights and action and recommendations that is palatable for business people. That is a very useful skill, and I think this clinic absolutely has helped me hone these skills and continue to work on them. And so that is something I really appreciated about this clinic. This clinic has also given me the opportunity to speak with so many people at different levels. And so with the National Grocers Association, I've gone to speak to stakeholders with the SNAP and WIC Online project. Even with my Waste Framework Directive, I've spoken to multiple partners with the European food banks and just have gotten to really get a really good understanding of international law, comparative law, and I think this will not only really refine the way that I approach not only legal problems but also business problems in a very practical sense. And so if you have any questions, please feel free to ask me, and thanks for bearing with my voice. Thanks.
All right, and we're gonna turn it over to Gray.
Oh,
Talk about farm to school, among other things.
All right, well, hi everyone, I am Gray. I'm not a law student anymore, but sometimes I play one in my other life. But I am a senior fellow at the Food Law and Policy Clinic. I'm also the supervising attorney for Mississippi Shelter Project, which is a student practice organization, the policy advocacy student practice organization that focuses on supporting community orgs and advocacy in the Mississippi Delta region. I'm going to talk to you now about the work that we do to support food system workers, and then also our farm to school work, as Kristen mentioned. So when I say food system worker, I mean the 28 million workers that work across our food system, all the way from production, all the way to distribution and retail and restaurants and kind of everything in between. But our current work supports advocacy related to farm workers in Massachusetts currently. So I'm a part of a coalition called the Fairness for Farmworkers Coalition, and it's a coalition that's led by an organization called Central West Justice Center, which is a worker justice center in the central western region of Massachusetts. It's also comprised of farm workers themselves and some other legal organizations, legal aid boards, Massachusetts Legal Reform Institute here in Boston area, and some other attorneys who are advocates in this space. And we are currently trying to support the passage of a couple of bills that are pending currently in the Massachusetts State Legislature called the Fairness for Farmworkers Act. And so what that currently farm workers earn a sub-minimum wage in Massachusetts. So the minimum wage for workers is $15 an hour, but for agricultural workers, it's $8 an hour. It's the minimum state minimum wage. And so the Fairness for Farm Workers Act seeks to remedy that and bring up farm workers to the state minimum wage. Also provides overtime protections as well as paid time off and breaks for farm workers, which are things that they're not currently entitled to because of exceptions under federal federal worker laws as well as state law. And so this is the third time actually that those bills have been up in the state legislature. So we're hoping this year that they actually make it through committee. So that's kind of where we are right now. And students in the past have helped me with white papers related to those bills to educate folks about the issues, as well as advocacy strategy and producing like one-pagers for advocacy days in the State House. Also, another time they've had the opportunity to go to the State House and educate staffers and legislators on about the bills. And so I'm really kind of supporting coalition work there. Other food system work that we've done in the clinic, we've kind of covered a lot of different areas, but some other things that I'll name are like looking at pesticide safety for farm workers. I've also done some work looking at worker cooperatives and kind of like the structures there for workers in various states that our partner was interested in exploring. So again, with 28 million workers and kind of all across all different areas, there's a number of different ways that we can support workers in the food system, and it also intersects with a lot of our other work like food access and nutrition. Like food workers are some of the most food insecure communities of all the worker communities. And so really that's a lot of the reason why I love doing this work is because it intersects with environmental and climate sustainability, kind of a lot of the other things that I'm interested in exploring from a systems perspective really all intersect with food system workers. And so it's a community that I'm really passionate about supporting and look forward to continuing to work with students on it. So I'm happy to answer any questions about that. Also, we'll talk to you a little bit briefly about our farm to school work, which is a little bit like it sounds. So the programs that work on getting food from farms like into schools. There's also some education around kind of agriculture in general and like community gardening. The programs can look a little bit different depending on the school and kind of where the age level of the students as well. But our work has been really focused on using local food procurement as a mechanism to support market opportunities for small and mid-sized agricultural producers, also getting wholesome, nutritious local foods into school programs. And so students and I have been working on some case studies for a program called Local Food for Schools that was terminated in March by the Trump administration, but was a COVID-era relief program that did kind of what it sounded. It provided money to states to get local food into schools. And so we've been looking at different states that implemented that program and creating case studies for that to be used as advocacy and education pieces to try for a coalition that's working to revive federal funding for a program like Local Food for Schools or Local Food for Schools itself. And then also just kind of, thinking a little bit more about just kind of local food procurement and values-based procurement, which also intersects with supporting workers as well. So that's another thing there. But kind of lots of opportunities to work on local and regional food systems, kind of supporting food system resilience for both the producer side, but also school nutrition and workers. So happy to answer any questions about that or talk more about opportunities to work on those kinds of projects. But thanks for letting me share.
All right, so that's our formal list of speakers today. I'm like genuinely so impressed with the work you all do, but I might be more impressed by your ability to keep time. Like that was perfect, so thank you all for that. Before we transition into questions, I was wondering, there are clinic staff and other students in the room, so if anyone wants to share anything about the projects you work on, we do have a couple extra minutes. If not, we can move right into y'all's questions. If you don't have questions, I have many questions for our clinical students, so yeah, just wanted to open the floor.
Oh, I'd love to hear about the food as medicine one.
Love that. Yeah, you've heard quite the spectrum. Heather, do you wanna start, or you want me to take it away?
I think you should take it away.
You heard most, if not all, of the projects that we've worked on. Food as medicine is one that you didn't hear from a clinical student about, but I work with our delightful colleague Heather, who's an amazing mentor and clinical instructor on the Food as Medicine project, in which we work really, really closely with our sister clinic, the Health Law and Policy Clinic, and food as medicine can mean a lot of different things, and honestly, there could be a whole lunch event on what it means. But just to say, we work with a lot of states, so often departments of health or other like Medicaid agencies, as well as community-based organizations who are seeking to or are implementing what we call food as medicine interventions. And what we mean by that is really food supports, so that could be like produce prescriptions, medically tailored meals, medically tailored groceries, and a nexus to the healthcare system. So there has to be some linkage there between food itself and the healthcare system. So I guess to put it into more context, if I had a diagnosis of type 2 diabetes and I went to my healthcare provider, they could prescribe me, if my state and if there are food as medicine offerings available to me, they could prescribe me a produce prescription or a voucher so I can go and redeem that at a farmer's market to get healthy food that would, help prevent a diet-related disease or manage a diet-related disease or treat one. So that's really what we talk about when we talk about food as medicine. And we're really helping provide technical assistance to states that are looking to make that coverage within the Medicaid system most often more formal so that people have access to those interventions through their health insurance system. So that's very rough and tumble overview of food as medicine, but that's a huge project at the clinic as well. And yeah, it's been really satisfying to me because Medicaid is a beast. I still feel like I'm learning day after day. And yeah, it's just been really exciting and fun to go a little bit outside the food system and put on my Medicaid and health law and policy hat when I can, and rely on my colleagues as well that are awesome. So thanks, Gray. It's good that we cover kind of the full scope. So anyone else on our team, Aka?
Yeah, no one has talked about food waste yet, even though food waste was mentioned, we just didn't get to talk about it. So, hi everyone, I'm Akif. I am a clinical fellow in the Food Law and Policy Clinic, and I work on food waste everywhere. So just a quick rundown of different types of things that we do. On the federal level, we do food waste work that includes things like analyzing tax law, which was a very recent thing that Andrea and April have been working on, and then I reviewed a memo and we learned a lot together about tax. None of us are tax experts, but we've been talking to tax experts, and April and I are oh, are we becoming tax experts all of a sudden? Which is
tax experts.
yeah, which came out of nowhere, just working on food waste work, because there are tax incentives available to people who donate food, and so learning about tax law helps us figure out how we can guide donors of food to reap as many benefits as they can when they give food to people. We also work with a national coalition called the Zero Food Waste Coalition, or we helped start the Zero Food Waste Coalition, and then we work with members in the Zero Food Waste Coalition to advocate for better food waste policies at the federal level and then also at the state level. State level policies can include things like working with schools on reducing their food waste, so there are state level policies on that. There are also organic waste bans is something that is picking up speed in this country, where states are banning organic waste, including food waste, from going to landfill, and so figuring out what the other pathways for food waste should be and can be, and states are doing a lot of innovative work on figuring out where organic waste should go and how to reduce it at the source. And then Heather and I have been working really hard on a local food waste policy toolkit, full actual name pending. But we have been doing so much work with stakeholders in different cities and counties across this country over the last, since last year, I think, basically since last October, researching local level policies on related to food waste. So that could also look like landfill-related policy. So we're looking at what different localities are doing to manage their own waste in the city, because cities and counties are responsible for all that organic matter. We've also talked to people about compost procurement, getting compost that is made to local farmers, getting it into urban agriculture. And like the types of law that we are juggling all the time go from tax to admin law to contract law with some of this procurement stuff. There's zoning, there is a bunch. So the food waste world is very broad, much broader than I was even expecting when I applied for this position. And I was like, yeah, environmental law, that's all I care about. Let me just do that. And then I got in and I was like, to get to the environment side, there's a bunch of stuff to do. So yeah, it's a fun project. And other students are working on it. They just talk about their stuff. So.
Thanks, Rocco. Yes. All right, I want to open the floor to anyone who has a question. Again, you can ask any of us, even those of us who haven't spoken. We're happy to answer any questions. As you ponder, I will also flag that we have a listserv that we send out newsletters to if you're interested. It's not frequent. We will not bombard your inbox at all, but they're interesting and usually fun. I received it as a clinic student and it was one of the few emails that I was happy to open, receive, and read.
I was wondering where you're gonna go.
Yeah. It can also just be about vibes of the clinic. I feel like you've gotten a sense of kind of the type of people that like this clinic, the type of food we like to provide to students, which is hopefully a refreshing one. But yeah, just feel free to ask anything.
What's the food law class like?
No, students should answer.
Okay.
Maybe Lulu could
Yeah,
answer.
I say Lulu.
Oh,
Let's go.
gosh.
Hi, I'm Lulu. I'm a student in the food law class and I really enjoyed it. Each week we cover a different topic that relates to the food system and you would be surprised about how broad it is and it touches everything from workers' rights in the meat industry, which was like one of our first focuses, to SNAP benefits and how those have changed with the One Big Beautiful Bill. We talk about the environmental effects of our current agricultural system, just so many things, and we have really great readings spanning from case law to certain bills that have been introduced in Congress to just opinion pieces or law review articles. Overall, it gives you a really good sense of all of the issues that we face today, and what's also great is it's extremely relevant to the current political system, especially with the Maha movement. So it really helps you get a good sense of what's going on in the news right now and some of the problems that have been associated with our food system historically since like even the 1800s.
Ooh, can you come with me everywhere?
Anyone want to add anything about the class?
Not a student, but from like a practical standpoint, like a lot of the class discussions are centered around a current controversy or debate where it might simulate, for example, a Senate hearing where students will sign up and they are witnesses that are providing testimony, and then the whole class gets to question them, which I think is a really fun way to kind of work through some of the issues. And then the final assignment is a policy proposal where you get to brainstorm and focus on like something that's of interest to you and put forth a proposal as to how to solve a particular like food policy issue.
I'll add one thing, which is as you've sort of heard from this discussion, there's so many areas of the food system. It's so broad. There's so many areas of law. The idea in the class is to kind of present a bunch of those, and then not everyone in the class is in the clinic. You can do just the seminar. But if you are working on clinic projects, then you're drilling into an area, but with an understanding of sort of where this fits into that broader landscape.
You guys mentioned that it's kind of more policy than law. Could you elaborate on like the policy, like what skills do you learn and stuff like that?
Any current students want to take that? Yeah.
I'll say, like, in my first meeting with Emily, I was like, I know nothing about policy. Like, I came from a litigation background, and I was like, I shouldn't be telling anybody what to do or, like, recommending what, like, no. But it does help you just, like, get a lot of confidence in doing that too, like understanding like how to conduct the research that helps like you understand where there are gaps, where there are problems, and like taking in like community voices as well to like design those policy systems and like think about how they would not just impact the problem you're dealing with, but like the downstream impacts they might have as well on other things. And so for me, that was really helpful, and I feel a lot more confident about writing like a you should do this kind of piece that I did before. So it helps.
I'll also add, like, when we are onboarding clinical students and assigning projects, we have a form that lists and describes all of the projects. But in addition to that, we also ask students or future students, like, what are you actually looking to develop skills-wise? Because I think you've heard, like, there are a range of deliverables that can range from, like, writing a formal memo to presenting to partners to blog posts, and we really do try to consider what your preferences are coming in, and like not only factoring that into which project you are assigned to, but when you are within a project, seeking out opportunities for students to really hone the skills that they've identified they want to work on. So there is quite a broad range, but we do try to make an effort to like know what you are looking for, and yeah, find those opportunities.
Yeah, I guess like on the policy and skills as well, I think it helps kind of get rid of that impression that's often given that like policy and law are like oh, you're a policy person or you're like a law or litigation person, when in reality like policy grows out of law. So going back and like as someone mentioned earlier, being able to read statutes better and translating them, and I think especially in like the comparative law piece, when we're doing like waste framework, like the waste framework directive or like EU level work, it was really enlightening to see, okay, the EU and the European Commission pass rules, and then each of these countries are interpreting them differently. And then some country will say, oh, we can't do this because our hands are tied, but a whole other country is doing something different from the same exact language. And that idea that, you know, policy kind of can grow from the same law and how you interpret it or how you act upon it. So I think both reading laws and kind of playing some games with how can you interpret this language differently and work with actual stakeholders differently. This is the practical skill I think I learned as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think just kind of points to something that I really enjoy about more policy-oriented work is like there's a lot of creativity in that as well, especially around like developing policy recommendations and how you're choosing to interpret a law that could be taken in a lot of different directions. Not a creative person otherwise, so it's been interesting. Any other questions? Any other final thoughts from clinic staff, students? Yes, Bianca.
Sorry. I think something else I also wanted to really plug about this clinic is that the clinic, yes, does provide you a lot of like relevant legal skills and skills that help you be a better lawyer, but I feel like the clinic, and especially like the clinical instructors this semester, have also really invested in me holistically and sought out ways of like, oh, how can I support you as a person overall? And so, for example, I'm someone who's really interested in food and property and land use. And April this semester really like listened to this, and then she was like, oh, I actually have this area of law that I think would be really interesting. And so she introduced me to the concept of heirs property. And so not only was that the subject of my policy proposal from the class this semester, but I am also going to be writing my J-term paper about it and delving further into it. I think this clinic also has a lot of people who have worked with me to, you know, be a better professional, be a better communicator, be a better, I think just like team player. And I think in addition to all of the legal skills that this clinic provides, it also, I feel like, has been very supportive of me holistically as a person.
I appreciate that, and I would double down on that. As evidenced by the fact that I was a clinical student and I stuck around and I don't want to leave. So yeah, it really is like it's a very supportive community, and as Bianca mentioned, like we all want to be working on skills that we either don't have yet or just want to really strengthen. So that's a huge part of being involved in the clinic for both students and staff alike. So yeah, I think that's a great note to end on. We're at 1:15. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to any clinical staff. We can hang out for a little bit, or any clinical students I know would be happy to answer questions. And I am going to leave this right here for the newsletter sign up. Thank you all.